Alright, so what I want to talk to you about today is digging apart the dellorto 34B FRD is set up for the VW Bug. Right, now this is a carb, this is linkage, this is claud's buggies, this is dellorto. So forget this stuff over here, but I don't want to take it apart. It's too big a pain in the butt to get it back together. So as I describe this thing, what I'm going to do is pull it apart kind of in the order that the gasoline is going to run through the motor. So gas comes in this port right here and runs over to this little reservoir. So what you find under this little reservoir is a fuel filter. So on my own personal car, I do not run fuel filters anywhere out here on these lines. I just don't really care. So any of the crap that comes in here is going to hit this filter, it's going to drop down, it's going to store in this reservoir right here. Now I was chatting with a guy on the internet, and he didn't realize that this reservoir, this is not actually your float bowl. This is just a reservoir for capturing crap that may make its way into the car. So what happens to your gas next, once it passes through the reservoir for dumping a load, comes up through this filter, and then passes down through that little port right there. Bear with me for a second. I'm going to put the top of this fuel filter back on. So the next thing you got to do, pull your top off. We're going to follow the flow of the gasoline, and through that little teeny tiny port, it then passes through this place right here, which is my needle valve and the needle valve seat. That piece right there is actually the seat. Right there, you can't really see it, is going to be the needle valve. So in order to see these things better, let me yank out the float. Get the float out by pulling this pin. Take away from this. I didn't realize at the time when I first pulled these things apart, which way do you take the pin? Well, there's a little notch in the carburetor right here, so you take your pin away from the notch. And since I've had my carburetors apart many times, my pin shouldn't be that big a deal to get out, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to cooperate. That should help. Let's see what I can do here. Ah, beautiful. Pin's loose. Float out of the way. And there you go. There's your needle valve and seat right there. This little tip here right there, it's got a spring in it. And that's a rather strong spring. This is a stronger spring than what came with the carburetor. But mine was severely gunked up, so I had to install new seats, new valves. Anyway, next place the gas goes. Put that guy away for a second. Goes to the valve and just runs down in here. This is your main carburetor gasoline bowl. So in order to drive the motor, all the gasoline passes down through this port right here. And this over here, next in the process, is your main gas jet, which is held in place by the gas jet holder. That little guy right there is a gas jet. Screws in and out. All the gas, except the pump jet, passes through that right there. This is going to be hard to see too. I'll just point it out. You just have to know that it's there. But there's a port in the side of the carburetor right down here for the pump. Gas from the pump runs through that port into the pump here. Inside this pump there's a little steel ball that can go up and down. It's down, it locks the port, so when you pump, rather than the gas going back to the bowl, the pump sends the gas up here. So if you take it apart and you've got gas left in there, you run your throttle, you'll see gas popping out right there if your pump is working properly. Just go like this a little bit, got gas in here, you see gas coming out right there. Alright, so that takes care of the pump. Then you got to look at the main. Your main circuit fits underneath that little port right down there. This is your air corrector jet. Nice. Below the air corrector jet is the emulsion tube. Nice. And below that, nothing. It's just a reservoir going all the way down to the bottom of the float bowl behind the main fuel jet. So your main fuel then comes out right there, at the center of what they call the secondary venturi. So your secondary venturi pops right out, no problem. There's the port. Gasoline comes through the side of the body of the carb right there, through the port, out the funnel, down the carb. Below that, following the path of the gas, is your main venturi. This happens to be a 25 millimeter main venturi. I had my carb set up to run on a 1415cc Carson Miler motor, so that's a fairly small venturi. I'm running 1745 right now, and that works fine. Maybe I could develop a little bit more horsepower with a bigger one, but it's just not worth it to me. I'm not going to change it, too expensive. So that's your main circuit. Reversing it, shoving my pieces back in, try to be quick with this thing. The next thing you want to do is your idle circuit. Your idle circuit runs down at the bottom of that little port right there. Now, this port doesn't go straight down. It goes down and then it turns sideways. So that the bottom of this port is actually sitting below your air corrector. So, if you have problems flowing gas, and you've cleaned your carburetor, and you're just still having problems, you're just not idling right. It's just too lean. Once, maybe, like with me, this guy worked. This guy, don't. What I found is that the passage that goes diagonally through here is really hard to clean. So what I did was take a little piece of baling wire, I put a little bend in the tip of it, I ran that down there until I found the little sideways port. And I just began working it and working it. And finally I began to see a little bit of powder. All my gunk was kind of powdery after I soaked it in carb cleaner and whatnot for like 2 weeks. So I began to finally see some powdery stuff. And just by simply blowing in it a few times, I was able to clear out the rest of the powder and freed it up. Boy, was that tough to diagnose. You think that your problem is your idle jet, and it's not. But let's follow the idle circuit a little bit more. In order to follow the idle circuit, you've got to run back into the top of your carburetor. So this is going to be, you have to look a little bit more. I hate to have to pull off that gasket, but to see what's going on, you really got to get this gasket out of the way. Well, that guy's got to get out of the way. And yes, that's going to be a problem too, isn't it? Yeah, it loves to sit on that. That little bore right there, this is part of the idle circuit. So let's get that gasket out of the way. So what happens on your idle? This is the tip of the idle jet right there. So your gas comes up in there, your idle says, I want some gas, you have to suck it through here, it goes down this tube right there. This guy right here, you can see it, this is the idle emulsifier. It's basically, it acts like the air corrector, but it's fixed. So you can't call it a corrector, it's just an air jet. It's an air jet for the idle circuit. So you get your emulsification right at the top of this, with the air there. The emulsified stuff then runs down this passage right here. That passage shouldn't gunk up, but if it does, it's not the easiest thing to clean out, but it's a big passage, not too hard to deal with. And passes through that hole right there without too much problem. You'll see there's another jet right there, not part of the idle circuit. So that corresponds, as it continues down the carburetor, to that hole right there. That hole runs all the way down to the bottom of the carburetor. And I mean all the way. So let's look at where it goes. And what is along the path. So you've got a bore down through here. It's hard to see, but it's there. Runs through here, down through here. Back of this. This is your mixture screw. So what comes out of the idle circuit, you can turn it down, you can turn it up. It then comes down, you have to follow around to the other side, and you get down to the bottom of the carburetor. And boy, this is going to be hard to see, but there is a single port right there, right at the tip of this. All of your idle fluids jet through that port right there. You gas your air, it all comes out right there. Right. So that takes care of that guy right there for the most part. We didn't actually look at the idle jet. So let's actually pull out the idle jet because this is kind of neat. And it takes a while. What I've got here, there's my idle jet. That's the full boat right there. And what I had to do with my carb, somewhere along the lines, I seem to have misplaced my original air correctors that came with this. So I went to Eurocarb and I bought 4 replacement jets because I don't know what size I need. Each one of these jets delivered to my door cost me $16. This represents $64. This is $64 worth of stuff right there. All because this little guy doesn't flow quite enough gas. So that's too bad. But anyway, it fits over there. So what have we done? We followed our gas there. We've done all of our jets. We pulled this piece of the carb apart. Pulled our floats off. We got our needle valve set. And let's do a little tiny bit on the back side over here. Because when you set your carb up, there's something that's kind of hard to do. And they'll tell you, you get online and there's just a bazillion carb setup processes. One of the things they never ever tell you, it's not that they never tell you, but it's really hard to find, is how to set up this throttle plate. And when you first turn your motor on, you got a brand new fresh build, you're going to want to have that throttle open enough so that the carb starts. The car starts. But once you've got you're up and running, you've done your braking, you're actually going to want your carb to settle down and go back to a normal idle. So what I did with my car, in attempting to get it to idle down, I pretty much got it set up so it was idling at about 800 RPM. But when I pulled the carburetors off, because it clearly was out of balance, it was having problems, what I realized was that my throttle, rather than being closed like this, was actually open a little bit. So when you open the carb up a little bit, and this is going to be, again, this is going to be next to impossible to see, but on the side of the carb, you've got your main idle port. There are 2 other teeny tiny ports right in there. Those are your progression ports. And in order to get enough fuel air mixture at idle, I actually had to have my throttle open far enough that I was pulling from my progression ports. This is a very clear indication that if you set your idle up and you're open on your throttle ports, that you don't have a big enough idle jet. So, what you need to do when you're setting these things up and you think you've got them set right, pull your carburetor off, get in here and check this. You need your throttle plate to not be open beyond either of the 2 progression ports. And I mean, it's like impossible to see. My camera won't do it. I can't focus tight enough with that camera. It doesn't have any kind of a macro lens, so I can't just shove it in your face and say, oh, look right here, this is what I'm talking about. But if you're open too much at idle, you're not right. Let me see, what else can we got to do with this carb? You see, this carb's, it's fairly clean. Works quite well. When I actually install the thing on the car, I actually have enough spring pressure there. I don't have to run any secondary springs, which is really nice. I think secondary springs are one of the worst things you can do these things. But over here, this is my major gunker. This is the one that was really fouled up. This is going to be hard to see, but this is just severely, just totally pitted. Look at the throttle shaft down there. Look at the rust on that thing. It's crazy. But if you open it up, it's still super smooth. I've taken my taken all my wires and I've cleaned out all the ports. And despite how severely gunked up this thing is back down in here, it runs, and it runs smooth. Really surprising. But this guy needs to have its fresh rear carb jets installed And before I get those jets installed and put them on the carb, I wanted to do this video. So I know a hell of a lot about these things, having just spent 2 freaking months trying to figure out why I'm not idling properly. What the hell is going on here? But it's fixed. I know why they do what they do. I know where the gas flows. I know where the air flows. And this information is just like, you dig around on the internet, you dig around on YouTube, and it's just not there. So if you got any questions, your FRD is not working right, give me a call.